evening, Grace America. I'm Hugh in Studio West. Ben Domenech joins me, as he does most Fridays. Ben is the editor-at-large of The Spectator. You can follow him on X at @BDomenech. He's a Fox News contributor. He's also the host of the Ben Domenech podcast, which I recommend to you heartily. Good Friday to you, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing well, Hugh, and obviously this was a week when there's plenty to talk about. So what do you got first on the docket?
Well, first on the docket, I want to talk about the crisis, the tragedy of the week in D.C., but in the same context of the bollards that did not work in New Orleans, the fire hydrants that did not work in Los Angeles, and the education system, the report card of which is truly horrifying for our eighth graders who are not literate. Do these things have something in common? The crash in the skies above Reagan National, the school dysfunction, the fire hydrants, and the bollards, do they all have something in common?
You know, from my perspective, they certainly do. Well, one is, of course, that these are things that are entrusted to our government that have failed the people who rely on them for their safety, security, and when they are tested, when they are actually having to live up to their obligation to the American citizenry, they are time and again found to be actually not up to the tasks. They fail. These systems sometimes fail because of human error, and these systems sometimes fail because of more fundamental problems that ought to be addressed. And in the case of this most recent failure, we had clear warning signs repeatedly of the degree to which the lack of sufficient air traffic control staffing across the country was leading to a number of different problems and so-called near misses that had been happening at airports, even to the tune of having one of these same near misses requiring another go-round happening just the previous night at Reagan National. And Hugh, based on where you lived when here in Old Town Alexandria, my home office faces in the direction of the route that these planes take all day. I see them coming in, and to see something like this happen, which, by the way, the crash ultimately took place directly in front of the apartment building where my parents live. It was just an astounding thing to have happen, and really is an indictment, I think, of a number of different things. Even if it ends up being something that they attempt to dismiss as a human error, perhaps of the pilot of the helicopter in question, I think there are more fundamental questions about how much the airline system in particular has failed to adapt in the wake of the pandemic, when they fired so many people, put so many things on freeze, and then ultimately had so many people retire that they have been behind the eight ball when it comes to both pilots, air traffic control, everything else that we require for a system that is stressed already and has been experiencing much higher levels of usage in the wake of the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm a citizen of Virginia, and I live most of the year under the flight path of DCA. I'm astonished because it's the most tightly constricted and most observed, highly sensitive flight corridor in America after 9/11. And therefore, I don't know if it's the American Airlines pilot, the Black Hawk helicopter pilot, or the air traffic controller, or all three. I don't know. I bet you the president knows more than all the reporters, though. And so I'm not going to criticize his remarks yesterday. I'm going to hope that Sean Duffy gets us details, because people want to know what caused this, because they want to know their measure of alarm when they fly. So they got to get out there and tell in a hurry what happened. Do you think they will?
I think they will, and I think that one of the reasons is, and this is unfortunate, it's because of that proximity to power that I think we will know the truth. The simple fact is that there are too many congressmen and senators who fly in and out of that airport with regularity, including Jim Justice flying back and forth every day, on his own jet, by the way, from West Virginia, that you have too much interest there, too much demand for answers for those not to come through. But also just that everyone in this community is hit by this. In the local establishment where I go, not infrequently to have a drink, Hugh, I went in the other day and discovered that one of the regulars, a fellow who I don't know all that well, but enough to say hello to, had lost both his wife and daughter.
Oh my gosh!
Plane crash, and it's just the kind of thing where you have so many connections in this community that you know, are 1 degree or you're 2 degrees away from someone who has experienced something related to this. And it's something that is just jarring because we don't think that things like this can happen in the nation's capital anymore. We assume that there's more expertise at play and that they would not, play at dice around so many important institutions, people, and places, especially in the wake of the lessons of 24 years ago. And that's something that I think, unfortunately, we were disabused of. And the one thing that I do hope that comes out of this is more recognition of what needs to be done to ensure American security, whether they are senators or congressmen or they are just citizens of this nation. When it comes to air travel, it's very important. We have one of the safest systems in the world, but it can still be better. And whatever needs to be done to achieve that, I hope that the president, and I'm sure that Sean Duffy, will be committed to trying to do it.
Typically, worries about liability have prohibited the government from running in, and liability be damned. One of my old partners, Tim, was an aircraft disaster plaintiff's lawyer. I'm retired, he's retired. We're not looking for business. But they always find out after years and years where the human error was. But sometimes it takes years and years because people don't want to pay the bill to those victims that you know in that bar and to the 67 families who have a airtight case against somebody or many people. Did you know, Ben, I learned this from the commentary podcast this morning, that we still don't know why the Francis Scott Key Bridge collision happened a year ago? We still do not have an answer?
In fact, I do. In fact, I was simply I was talking about this as happenstance just a couple of weeks ago with a friend of mine who recently bought a house in Baltimore, and she brought it up to me, and it was just one of these things where I was saying, I guess I lost it in the sea of all the things that we do not know, like the motives of the Las Vegas shooter. And
that's my first. That's the number one thing. How about the bollards not being repaired in New Orleans? Somebody decided not, and the empty reservoir in Pacific Palisades, somebody said, take the cover off, drain the reservoir. We never find out.
It's absolutely heinous that we don't. And look, Hugh, you know the way that this played out during the pandemic. They wanted to play hide the ball with everything. And look, I mean, even more recently, look at the situation regarding drones and the way that the Biden administration talked about that. And then we get the very first press conference from this administration. And Caroline Leavitt comes out and she says, actually, the president told me that, that I can tell you this. These were all FAA approved flights. There were some hobbyists as well. But, in terms of the mass, panic that emerged in New Jersey, you could have had more clarification. And yet, time and again, and, sometimes for reasons that they believe are justified, sometimes simply because they think that it's better to keep the public in the dark on this because of ramifications that we don't always understand. The government does not put itself in a position where it increases in our trust. And that's something that needs to change with this new administration. And it's one where, look, at the end of the day, I think we're going to have more confidence in Sean Duffy at the Department of Transportation than we ever did in Pete Buttigieg. But that's also not saying a lot.
So, a very low bar. What about the near illiteracy of a third of our eighth graders? Now, that's a systemic problem. It's one that is crippling, even in the medium term, and I know why it exists. But are we going to do anything about it? I mean, Tennessee yesterday voted a school choice program for 20,000 of its students. That's, I don't know how many of that is. Better than none, but not as good as everyone. What do you think? Are we going to fix public education?
Look, I know that we are so overdue on this, but so much of the plight of the American working class, and I don't want to, put Vivek Ramaswamy on the spot, but he did this interview with Andrew Schultz, which I commend to you to check out, where the comedian Andrew Schultz was going pretty aggressively at him, basically saying, that you have endorsed the idea that Americans are too mentally defective to compete with those who would come from overseas. To me, that's an argument that a lot of Americans, far too many of us, just accept as being the natural state of things. And it's not. It's an indictment of the failure of our public education system. And look, we cannot continue to endure as a great nation if we have a situation of true segregation between those who can meet the basic task of literacy and those who cannot, even if we throw more and more money into these systems that have only proven that they can get more expensive as they get as they get worse and worse when it comes to every measure of failure. It's not acceptable, Hugh. It has to be changed. And look, I know that this administration has so much on its plate. There's so many things it's going to try to do. But this has to be a major priority in terms of turning the ship around, because otherwise this crew of children who are coming out, especially those who had to live through the pandemic and live with those screens for so long, they're going to be set behind for the rest of their lives.
I'm coming back with Ben Domenech. I'm back with Ben Domenech, asking him the same question that I asked Congressman Crenshaw and Matt Continetti earlier. Who are America's greatest enemies? And by enemies, I mean those who would diminish us, those who would damage us, those who would displace us, those who would destroy us. I got answers from the congressman and from Matt, Ben. Who are our greatest enemies?
Well, I'm tempted to ask if either of them got cute with it.
No, they went right at it. But I'll say Ben Crenshaw. He's not a golfer. Congressman Crenshaw, Dan Crenshaw, said a threat matrix isn't ranked order, Hugh. You got to be aware that some are immediate.
Right. Well, here's what I say. Let's evaluate this in terms of immediacy and in terms of the longer perspective. In immediacy, I would say the greatest threat that we have is that we have a failed narco state on our southern border that has for too long gotten away with far too much and been the pathway for much worse than what emerges from within it.
That was the first on the bingo card of Ben Crenshaw, the cartels.
Okay, look, I just think in terms of immediacy, that is the biggest threat. In terms of the overall scope, quite obviously it is not, because if you had the will to do what needs to be done in terms of establishing a true America First foreign policy for the Western Hemisphere that understands the need for us to have a true renewal of the Monroe Doctrine and to understand what our immediate obligations are to our citizens, including those who are experienced, I do not exaggerate when I say regular invasion from these cartels into American property and territory along that southern border, then we would be able to do it, I believe, forcefully, quickly, and effectively. In the longer term, there is no question that our biggest foe in the world is the Chinese Communist Party and its octopus-like tentacles that go out across the world in ways that I think this administration and the first Trump administration understood to a greater degree than any other, in my lifetime, which is to say that they understand that the hopes and dreams of the 1990s as it related to China did not come to fruition. They may have been well-meaning, but they did not turn out the way that we would have hoped. And instead, what we have, is a nation state that is bent on our destruction, not just as another power, but as a people.
Yeah, not our displacement, not been damaging us, destroying us. By the way, they had a tactical win this week with DeepSeek. One of my law students, a good one, a curious one, had downloaded it. I said, "Are you out of your mind? That's hello, spy, come into my house." And I think I shamed everyone into getting rid of it. But 30 seconds, Ben, that was a win for them.
It was a win for them, and it's also, I mean, this is the other thing. It's their wins tend to come as a surprise for our marketplaces and for our leaders in ways that continues to disturb me. That they do things that they do not expect, or that they are quicker to come to conclusions and keep them hidden for far too long. And I'm sure there are people who knew something like this was coming, but even some of the top minds in this space did not know it and seemed to be taken by surprise when
head faked everyone into making it the #1 app downloaded from the Apple Store. I'm coming back with Ben on the program. Stay tuned. Ben Domenech is my guest. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'm playing B.J. Thomas because I'm throwing out an old B.J. Thomas album cover that was used in the old studio that I'm just going to toss unless it has some value, which I don't think it does. Ben Domenech on the bingo card of enemies. The other ones listed were Iran and its proxies, Russia, North Korea, and various terrorist groups like ISIS and the guy in New Orleans on New Year's Day. So,
can I add something?
Yeah.
I would like to add a little place to your bingo card called Hollywood.
Okay, that's a complicated subject. But go ahead, tell me why.
It's a complicated subject, but let me just give this case for you. I believe that if we are going to be about an America First ideal, one that extends beyond the current presidency to something that is a longer-term goal. And I was thinking about this in the context recently of
Captain America,
doing a mini documentary about Andrew Breitbart.
Oh, okay.
The need for cultural restoration is paramount in this moment. Look at the Oscar nominees and look at how insignificant they are culturally.
They're crazy.
They're insane. I also think it's absolutely hilarious that a movie like Amelia Perez, which is unwatchable, would get 13 different nominations, tying films like Mary Poppins and classics.
Virtue signaling at its worst.
It is terrible, and it's just terrible as both art and terrible. It would be terrible even without the politics. But my point is more this: America should once again become the cultural exporter to the world that people used to know it as, meaning that this is the place where people want to come in order to create content that flows throughout the world, influences people in ways they don't even fully understand, and is admired throughout the world for what it can achieve. And instead, we have gone in a completely different direction in recent years, and we're going to continue to go that way.
Let me add, Captain America, whatever its subtitle is, the new one. It's an anti-American movie with an actor did anti-American things. I'm not going. I hope no one goes. I hope it crashes because until Disney learns.
It also they even had to edit it because it was even worse apparently in terms of being even more anti-American the first time it was tested with audiences, and they hated it. So my point is this: I believe that the cultural supremacy of America is deeply important for the future of the world in the West. That in order to get back to that point where we make the best music, we make the best movies, we have the best culture in terms of what people aspire to, I think that losing that is incredibly important, and it sets up a situation where others will fill in the void and take our place, and they will be places that do not have our values, do not have our shared ideals, and are opposed ultimately to the freedom of humanity. And that's something that I think is deeply and critically dangerous, and something that we need to understand and evaluate as being just as important on certain levels as all the other of the threats that you
Hollywood are full of morons, and the box office will tell them to stop. But I want to go back to Iran. Iran's proxy is shooting at our sailors. And last year, their proxy killed our soldiers in Jordan. And they're attacking our ally, Israel. They're actually the most immediate tactical threat to our warriors. I think that's true. Do you agree?
Yes, I would agree. I mean, if you could say that what we see from Mexico and the failed narco state there is the immediate threat to our citizens.
Yes.
I would say that. But to our warriors, yes, you are correct.
All right. Then we've got Russia, North Korea, and I want to spend some time. And obviously various terrorists, including the wacky terrorist that killed the Vermont border guard, including the terrorist in New Orleans, including remnants of ISIS that might be in Syria. I want to focus on Russia and North Korea because they are actually partnering up now, and Norks are going into the front lines in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. I think they're our enemy. They're the one that we are most likely to be able to deal with in a kind of Nixon to China moment. Do you agree or disagree with that?
How would that play out, Hugh? I mean, I could see what you're getting at there, but in terms of your anticipation of how that would play out, what do you think would be the leverage point or the way that this administration would tackle
oil prices? And it's because we have no leverage over China. They're too big. Yeah. And we have no leverage over Iran. It's a theocracy, and it's a maniac theocracy. So if I'm trying to figure out who to deal with to try and split up.
So it's simply the point of leverage as it relates to energy and oil that we would be able to I mean, I am willing to consider that argument. I think that that's probably correct. The truth is that from my perspective, the Iranian problem is one of the most difficult because it's such an insane regime.
They're theocrats.
It doesn't respond to the same signals the way that others can. And that's something that I think is going to be a continual problem for us. I'm not sure that this administration is going to, given everything that they've got on their plate, do anything but get us to a better point of stasis as it relates to that.
Oh, well, it's a one-day problem. As Ehud Barak used to say, I think he yelled at W. It'd take you one day, and that the strategic threat would be removed in one day. We don't want to go to war. We're not sending troops abroad again. I'm not a neocon, or what anti-neocons think a neocon is, which is endless wars for the benefit of the industrial war complex. It's nonsense, but I'm just a Reagan conservative. You can do a lot in a day in Iran to set them back.
I think that one of the things that we need to think about going forward here is just given the level to which we face so many different challenges, prioritizing what can be done and done effectively with the tools that we have at hand right now, and then setting us up to have better tools in the future is really what I think this administration needs to be about.
And so I got a quick exit. We've got Rubio, Burgum, who's on the National Security Council now, Hegseth, and Waltz. I think they're the equal of any group of national security people we've had in a long time.
I agree, and I can't wait to see what Waltz does in particular, because I think he's bringing a combination of a stiff spine and an awareness of the problems that has long been lacking in that role.
He's a warrior. He's a Green Beret. Yeah. He's been in the field of fire in Afghanistan. He's shot the enemy. He's been shot at by the enemy. He's lost friends, and he's really smart.
Yeah, look, I think we have a generation now who's been through a level of experience that, frankly, prior generations that served during the 90s, during the post-Gulf War era, didn't really get. And that's something that I think is going to serve them well in these jobs. And look, I again, give credit to the president for the fact that he has put a number of people in these jobs who don't necessarily have the same opinions, don't necessarily fall along the same lines, but have advantages, and I think have already shown themselves to be capable communicators and very studied in terms of what they understand about what's gone on in the world in recent years.
Now, Ben, I have a quick exit question. If you want to expand on it, you have to stay into the segment in between.
I got to go after this and make dinner. Sorry.
Is Edward Snowden a traitor?
I don't believe that Edward Snowden would categorize as a traitor, only because I like to think of traitors as people who I think should be executed. I don't think that necessarily of Edward Snowden. I do think that he's a criminal, and I would like to see him rot in jail for the rest of his life. However, I will also say that this whole idea that he was, not a traitor, I think was dependent on him remaining in America. And the moment that he chose to go and flee to Russia, I think that became much more of a discussion.
Yeah, he went from being a leaker to a traitor when he skipped out to Russia. In my book, in Hugh Hewitt's book.
In your book, yes.
You've got a different book. Ben Domenech, thank you. Follow him on X at B Domenech. Listen to his podcast, The Ben Domenech Show.